If you are sick often, or want to avoid sickness, or you just want to be healthy, then this video is for you. Watch this video to the end so you know the things that are making you sick. First, a disclaimer. I am not a qualified healthcare professional and the information provided is for general information purposes only. In other words, this is all a theory. First, I should mention I have a long, informative video of a summary of the book, Never Be Sick Again, where I say like the main points. So either go and watch that now so that you have context for this video and then come back, or just watch this, and then if you're interested in what you hear from this, you can feel free to go and watch that. So a very small bit of context is in that video I explain that there is one disease, 2 causes and 6 pathways. One of the 2 causes, and also which is one of the 6 pathways, and what I'm going to talk about in this video is one of the 2 causes is toxicity, and number 2 out of the 6 pathways is toxin. Toxins interfere with normal cell function, thereby causing malfunctions. Most people know that toxins are dangerous, but what actually are toxins, and how do toxins damage our cells? We are exposed to many different toxins in many different ways, in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the clothes we wear, and the food we eat. In our modern world, we're exposed to these environmental toxins every day. Toxins in our environment can impose an undue external burden on us. While poor digestion, lack of exercise, and negative thoughts and emotions can increase our toxic loads internally, our bodies have the ability to detoxify. But our detoxification mechanisms require essential nutrients to function properly, which is the thing I talk about in the video I made. Inadequate nutrition deprives the body of the raw materials necessary to detoxify, so toxic levels build and negatively affect cellular health. In our society, toxic overload is having a bigger effect than it should, because our deficient diets do not supply the nutrients necessary to operate and maintain our detoxification mechanisms. Not only is our toxic load the highest in history, but our ability to process and eliminate these toxins is impaired. Because we know that excessive toxic exposure causes disease, learning about the toxin pathway can teach us which substances are toxic, how toxic they are, which they are, and how they get there, and how we can minimize our exposure to them. The toxin pathway provides insight into the toxic aspects of our daily lives in our food supply, water supply, homes, and personal products, including many soaps, shampoos, and toothpastes. Fortunately, healthful alternatives are available. Toxic exposure is a fact of life, and the body is designed to deal with it. Our problem is toxic overload, so when the toxic input exceeds our ability to process it. Understanding this pathway can help to reduce toxic exposure to manageable levels by teaching us to recognise and avoid toxins in our daily lives. So I mentioned just then, like products like toothpaste, shampoo, etc. That's going to be for a video for another day, where I'll explain what I use and what you can use that's not toxic. But in this video, I'm going to be talking about foods and things to avoid. So here now are things to avoid that are toxic to us and therefore, as mentioned earlier, mess with our health and make us sick. With such misinformation, we tend to make irrational and harmful decisions. A diet that focuses on anything other than meeting the nutritional needs of cells allows your body to get sick. So the 4 worst food choices compromising the bulk of the average American diet and is disastrous to the health of our population are: number 1, sugar. Now many people will know this, I imagine, but this is obviously processed sugar, not natural sugar, which is in fruits, because natural sugar that's in fruits like fructose is actually good for you. Then white flour. This is one people might be surprised because it's been normalised. Pasta and bread. Whereas if you think about it, that's just processed food. It's not an actual original raw food. You have to make it. However, this is made even worse when it's then very processed and it's like bread you get from a supermarket and it's got 90 ingredients in it. You don't need them 90 ingredients to make that bread. That's because it's going to sit in a store for months. So if you're going to have bread, at least make your own. And there's then alternatives to white flour as well. Processed oils. Again, this is one many people will know, but no one cares. Like every single thing you eat, you go to a restaurant, processed foods, full of these processed oils you don't need. And there's alternatives, so why not use them? Coconut oil, you can use that, easy as, I use it. And lastly, milk products, dairy. So this is where people will be most like, oh my gosh, milk products. Yeah. The thing is, as I'll talk later on, I'm not going to go into it now, but they're not for us. I'm not the proper like animal welfare guy, but you think about it logically, as I'm always thinking logically. Milk from cows for calves, not for humans. So clearly it's obvious why it's going to be toxic, because it's not for us. So again, something I'm not deeply going to go into, because I've talked about it massively in my long informative video earlier, Never Be Sick Again. But disease isn't just a thing that suddenly happens, it's something from continuous toxicity or continuous nutrient deficiency. So consuming these foods, especially as a large part of the diet and over time, is virtually guaranteed to cause disease. They provide little nutrition and are toxic as well. If every American were to stop eating these foods, our epidemic of chronic disease would decline dramatically. Problematic in their own right, the real harm caused by these 4 food failures comes from the fact that we eat them repeatedly day by day, meal by meal. And many of you will now be thinking, provide little nutrition? Well, again, this is something that's not taught. If you're having milk that's for a calf, not for you, it might have all these nutrients in it, but our body can't digest it because, as I've said, it's not for us. And not only that, again, think logically, when you're eating meat, for example, which again I'm not going to go into in this, it's just secondary nutrition. What does the cow eat? Grass. If you want the nutrients, go and eat some grass. So look at gorillas, and I know there's genetic differences, but they're massively strong. And what do they eat? Plants. They don't eat meat. They don't go and eat other animals. And again, I'm not vegan, vegetarian, but I'm just coming from a health side that it's a fact, all these things I'm mentioning. Now here's an insane study that I read, and I kind of couldn't believe it, but at the same time I could. This is a study where bad foods were removed from kids' diet in a school. What would happen if we eliminated certain food additives from our diet? A study reported in 1986 issue of the International Journal of Biosocial Research addressed this question. Between 1979 and 1983, the New York City public school system gradually removed foods containing artificial colours and flavours from the school lunches served to more than 1 million children. During this same period, without any other changes being induced, the school children's academic performance skyrocketed. New York City schools experienced the largest 4-year gain in academic performance ever measured in any city school district in US history. How was such improvements possible? Food additives are toxic. They poison cells. When you stop poison cells, health improves. As the health of brain cells improves, so does in our ability to think, learn and remember. A contributing factor to today's poor academic performance is the burden of toxic exposure on the developing minds of our young people. Unfortunately, once the experiment was over, because of political pressure from conventional food suppliers, the New York City schools reversed to normal foods and these extraordinary gains were lost. As you will know, and this is common knowledge, you should not be eating processed foods. But here's another risk with processed foods you do not find on the label. Toxic chemical residues. The manufacturer does not deliberately add these chemicals, but they are present in almost all ordinary commercial foods. If manufacturers do not add it, they do not have to list it. So there's a guy called David who became ill in the book where they explained, and anyway, they got to the bottom of it and he had a lot of canned tuna, and tuna is very high in mercury, and this then gave him his illness because it was toxic. Obviously mercury is not listed on the label, but it is in there, so when you get like I said, tuna, it'll just say tuna. It's not going to say mercury, microplastics, all the extra things that are now in fish. So it wasn't on the label because it was in the fish. It wasn't added. Chemical residues come from many different sources, including industrial chemical and pesticide residues, herbicides, fungicides, artificial ripening agents, hormones and other veterinary drugs, and packaging materials. And then in this book, there was the main guy that wrote the book that would then go with people who had illnesses and go around the shop with them and show them what they should and shouldn't be eating. So on our tour of hidden toxic residues, Cynthia, Tom and I took a walk down the frozen food aisle. According to the 1982 to 1986 FDA Total Diet Study, frozen French fries contained 70 different pesticide residues. Frozen pizza had 67 industrial and pesticide residues. Frozen chocolate cake contained 61 toxic residues and milk chocolate had 93. Peanut butter had a whopping 183, including highly carcinogenic aflatoxin, which is produced by mould that grows on peanuts. Lurking in all the aisles was another overlooked danger: packaging materials. The toxins in packaging materials such as plastic wrap, plastic bottles, milk containers, juice boxes, styrofoam and epoxy can linings can leach toxins into our foods before we eat them. Foods coming into contact with packaging materials that contain water or oil soluble toxic chemicals can absorb these chemicals, and then the consumer ingests them. Portions of the polymers, plasticizers, stabilizers, fillers and even colorants in plastic wrap can dissolve into the food. Avoid foods packaged in plastic. Choose foods packaged in more appropriate materials such as paper and glass. However, as you know, if you're buying fresh anyway, there's going to be no packaging anyway. If you're buying fresh apples, there's going to be there that have been picked. They're not going to be in a plastic wrap because they're not like industrialized, if that's the word. And same with fish. If you're buying fresh fish at a supermarket, it's just sat there in ice before you order it, and then I think they put it into paper or something. So I touched on things earlier and I said to avoid milk products / dairy. Now I'm sure this confused you, as well as I'm sure flour confused you too, but because it's not well known and it's also being normalised, this is why you think this way. Dangers in dairy and meat. Our little group arrived at the dairy section. As you recall, milk and dairy products are not appropriate for human consumption and should be avoided by everyone, especially infants and young children. Toxic bioaccumulation is a problem. Virtually all the toxins which a cow is exposed during its life bioaccumulate in its tissues, and these toxins are then present in its milk. You should regard milk as a toxic soup filled with pesticides, antibiotics, dioxins, hormones, sulfur drugs, tranquilizers and other contaminants. Worse, the practice of pasteurization, a heat treatment done to virtually all milk products to kill bacteria, alters the physical and chemical properties of the milk. Pasteurization not only renders the nutrients less useful to your body, but creates toxins as well. Between the toxic bioaccumulation, the pasteurization and the fact that milk products make up 25 to 50% of Americans' diets, milk is a major contributing factor to our high rates of infectious, allergic and chronic disease. In fact, milk consumption has been linked to many diseases, including osteoporosis, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, heart disease and cancer. My recommendation to Cynthia and Tom was that they eliminate milk and milk products from their family diet. I recommend the same to you. Milk does not do your body good. Animal products were our next stop. Meat and eggs can have serious toxicity problems. Though animal products contain essential nutrients and I do not recommend a diet devoid of them, you must choose your sources carefully. The nutritional values of a food source should always be weighed against the toxins it contains or is likely to contain. Quick thing on this, which is nothing to do with the book, but through my own research and other people, Brian Johnson, Embodiment Celestial, you can search both them up on social medias. One of which, Brian Johnson, he does not consume meat, but he takes supplements. There's then the whole B12 supplement. B12 is what you lack if you're vegan. And again, I'm going to make a video on this for vegans and that. Not that I'm a vegan, but I've done my research. B12 and iron. The problem with B12, when you take a B12 supplement, it's very highly toxic and a highly processed, like fake nutrient, like it's just made in a lab. So you don't want to take a B12 supplement if you're vegan, because that's why so many vegans look half dead and have depression and that, and it's because of that B12 carcinogenic vitamin. However, what you then need to do is you either need to fast or take sea moss, and there's other like superfoods and things with mad nutrients in it, but sea moss has 92 out of the 102 nutrients the body needs in it. Commercial livestock contain many toxins which become concentrated in their tissues. Foods from commercial cattle and their milk, chickens and their eggs, and most farmed fish are all poor food choices. All their lives, these animals are fed foods that are lacking in nutrition and toxic, contaminated with pesticides and other agricultural chemicals. Pound for pound, livestock feed is substantially more toxic than the foods we eat. Not to mention that large animals like cattle eat a lot more food than we do. When you eat these highly toxic animals or products derived from them, the toxins enter you. In 1976, the EPA studied human breast milk and found that the toxic contaminants in the milk of vegetarian mothers was only 1 to 2% of the national average. The solution is to minimise toxic exposure by selecting organically produced meat, poultry, eggs and wild fish from relatively non-polluted deep water ocean areas rather than those harvested from polluted coastal areas or farmed. Selecting organically produced animal products almost certainly requires a trip to a well-stocked, reputable health food store. The foods are more expensive, but the extra money buys protection from toxins, as well as contributes to better nutrition and a more environmentally responsible method of farming. Health is a choice. You can pay now for good food, or pay later for doctors and hospital. If you cannot find ideal food, however, often you can make better choices. If you cannot find high quality organic animal products, then minimise your consumption. Remember, the overwhelming majority of our toxic pesticide exposure is from non-organic animal products. I've then further investigated that the fish, there's only 2 fish, well that I know of anyway, that are decently healthy, and that's haddock and salmon, and they're the only fish I have. Every now and then cod. Now here's the big issue. You might think that you're eating correctly and drinking correctly as well, but the number one thing that the problem is that things have been normalised. So there's things you think are fine that are actually highly toxic. For example, look what's been normalised massively: drinking alcohol, beer especially, wines. There's research around that it's like okay, but beer is highly toxic, full of chemicals, terrible for you, causes all these issues, but it's been normalised. Everyone drinks it, everyone thinks it's normal. If you don't drink alcohol, you're seen as the weird one, when they're the weird ones, without making you take any offence. But it's toxic, it's not for us, it's made in a lab. And number 2, a thing some people know, not many people, our food's been compromised. If you look back 100 years ago, food was just made nicely. You'd go and get your little amounts, there were no processed foods, you had a little amount and there was scarcity of food, but at least it was good for you. And that's why your grandparents, not everyone, they live until 70, 90, 100, and that's like they went through wars, at least where I live, and didn't have the greatest of like diets, because like I say, there weren't that much food. They'd smoke, drink occasionally, but there weren't all these processed foods. There wasn't Domino's, there wasn't McDonald's, there wasn't all these, like I say, bad things, chemicals, toxins, processed things, colours, flavours, preservatives. So that's why they live long. And I've said this recently, that I fully believe that the people of my generation, this generation, will be living till 40s and 50s, because the people of my parents' generation that are 40s and 50s now only then started at about 20, 30, 40, McDonald's coming into play and all these other things. Unless you have, again, a good diet, they're then going to live till 60s, 70s, I imagine. But like I say, my generation, they've been brought up that this is normal, and they're going to live till 40s and 50s. I'm telling you now, unless everyone gets healthier and nutritious and that, my generation, the average age will be 50 or 60 years. So here are the nutrition failures. Fruit and vegetable plants are now grown with artificial fertilizers that produce more food per acre, but these foods are not nearly as rich in nutritional content. Use of artificial fertilizers has led to depletion of minerals in the soil because they do not add minerals to replace those being lost with each new crop. Soil depletion leads to nutritional deficiency in all of us. Since foods are not eaten fresh off the plant, many must be harvested before they are ripe in order to prevent spoilage during transportation and distribution. This premature harvesting does not allow food to reach its full nutritional maturity, thereby contributing to nutritional deficiency. So where I've noticed this is I picked an apple off of a tree like there and then and ate it, and I was eating it, and by the time I got to my last bite, it had gone brown. Now think about the fruit you eat. You eat it, you can leave it there, and after probably minutes, 10 minutes, maybe even up to an hour, that's when it'll start going brown. When you eat fresh fruit, it spoils 10 times quicker. And that's what I'm then going to mention about GMO foods and a lot of the foods you eat. If they're not organic or fresh there and then picked, that's when there's an issue. The nutritional content of the food then further deteriorates as the food ages during storage, transportation and distribution. Food is often processed, further depleting its nutritional content in order to make it easier to store and consume. Among these foods are flour, pasta, bread, sugar, and canned and packaged foods. Cooked foods are also nutritionally inferior to raw ones, and most of the American diet consists of both processed and cooked foods. Toxic assaults. The farming of large single crops has created new and serious problems of insect infestations, necessitating the use of insecticides. These insecticides, along with the use of herbicides and fungicides, have made food production methods a significant contributor to our toxic environment and food supply. The modern processed food industry adds man-made preservatives, flavours, colours and other toxic chemicals to our food. No one knows what the combination of all these chemicals is doing to our bodies. Energy demands, first for coal and now for gas and oil, are constantly polluting our environment. Virtually all of our industrial processes, from printing our daily newspapers to painting our homes and building cars and computers, have led to the introduction of tens of thousands of man-made chemicals into our environment, all of which put toxic loads into our bodies. Over the past century or so, dramatic changes in diet and environment have created a society of nutritionally deficient and chemically toxic Americans. Virtually all of the food we can buy in a modern supermarket is nutritionally inferior to the foods our ancestors consumed. The purity of the air and water but all is not lost. Sources do exist today where we can find quality foods with high nutritional content. We can lower our daily toxic exposure, but first we need to learn where to look and how to take charge. What I found helpful was to study those people who have already shown us the way. Small populations of people in remote areas around the world have shown us how simply meeting the body's needs along each of the 6 pathways can result in tremendous energy, stamina and lack of disease, and until age 120, 130 or even older. I will tell you more about these remarkable people, and I will also tell you the intrusions of modern civilization into those populations since the 1970s have robbed them of their stunning health and longevity. So these are 2. One of them is the Hunzans, which I will probably research and make a video on in the future. And another is the people of Okinawa in Japan, where I've made several videos on them. Foods that tamper with destiny. GMO foods. No discussion of food toxins would be complete without the mention of potential for poisoning the entire population with genetically modified foods. Genetic engineering is the process of disrupting the genetic blueprints of living organs, thus by inserting genetic information from other organisms to obtain some desirable characteristics, such as resistance to herbicides or insects. These foods are novel and totally unnatural, and we have no idea what the future health consequences may be. Yet avoiding genetically modified foods is difficult. Insertion of genes into genetic material is not a precise process. It is all too easy to obtain unintended results that lower nutritional content, create harmful allergens, or lead to the creation of unique toxins. The effects of these toxins may not become known for years, while irreparable harm is being done. The best way to avoid these foods is to eat organically produced foods. I don't know if it's been passed yet, but in the past they did not need to specify GMO products. I don't know if this has changed, but the one way you can make sure that you aren't eating GMO products is by eating organic produce. So on this channel, I'm all about self-improvement, whether that's health, fitness, money, philosophy, psychology, whatever it is, relationships. So obviously there's going to be upcoming videos on health in the future, and one of which will be foods you can eat, so subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. And as I mentioned at the start, I made a video on Never Be Sick Again, the book, a review on that, where I summarise the book. So if you want to stay healthy, then you can click that on screen now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.